This woman worked aboard the three largest ocean liners ever built. All three of them ended in catastrophe, and she walked away from every single one. She was on the first when it was torn open in a collision. She was on the second when it struck an iceberg and took 1,500 people down with it. And she was on the third when it sank in under an hour, dragging her beneath the hull. Her name was Violet Jessop. The newspapers would come to call her Miss Unsinkable. This is how a single stewardess cheated the sea 3 times. But to understand how impossible her luck was, you have to start with the ships. Because in 1910, the White Star Line was building the 3 most magnificent vessels the world had ever seen. The Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic, 3 sisters, each bigger than the last, each said to be practically unsinkable. Violet Jessop would serve on all 3. In 1911, Violet joined the first of them, the brand new Olympic, as a stewardess. She was 23, and going to sea had already saved her life once. From an illness, doctors said she would not survive as a child. For a few months, life aboard the Olympic was everything she had dreamed of. And then, on the 20th of September, it nearly ended. As the Olympic steamed out of Southampton, a British warship, the cruiser Hawke, was crossing nearby. The 2 ships were pulled together by the suction of their own giant hulls. The Hawke slammed into the Olympic's side, tearing a massive hole below the waterline. It should have been a catastrophe. But the Olympic stayed afloat and limped back to port. No one was killed. Violet had survived her first disaster at sea, and she thought it would be the most dangerous day of her life. She had no idea what was coming. The following year, Violet transferred to the newest and grandest sister of them all, a ship the whole world was calling unsinkable, the Titanic. On the 10th of April 1912, she sailed from Southampton on the Titanic's very first voyage, working the first-class cabins in a floating palace of marble and gold. 4 nights later, just before midnight, she felt a strange shudder run through the ship. The Titanic had struck an iceberg. At first, few believed it was serious. The ship was unsinkable, but the crew knew the truth. The sea was pouring in, and there were not enough lifeboats for even half the people aboard. Violet was ordered up on deck, told to set an example for the non-English-speaking passengers, to show them the lifeboats were safe. She stood in the freezing dark and watched the boats being loaded. Then an officer put her into lifeboat 16, and as the boat began to lower, someone reached out and placed a baby in her arms. From the water, she watched the greatest ship in the world tilt, break, and slide beneath the Atlantic, taking more than 1,500 souls with it into the dark. Violet Jessop survived the Titanic. The next morning, aboard the rescue ship, a woman grabbed the baby from her arms and vanished into the crowd without a word. Violet never learned who either of them were. You would think that after that, she would never set foot on a ship again. Instead, when the world went to war, she volunteered for the most dangerous ship of all. By 1916, the third sister, the Britannic, the largest of them all, had been turned into a hospital ship for the Great War, and Violet was aboard her, now serving as a nurse. On the morning of the 21st of November in the Aegean Sea, a huge explosion tore through the bow. The Britannic had struck a mine. And this time it was worse. The portholes had been left open to air the wards. As the bow dropped, the sea flooded in through them, and the giant ship began to sink far faster than the Titanic ever had. Violet rushed to the deck. Lifeboats were already being lowered. She jumped or was thrown into the water beside the ship, just as 2 boats were pulled toward the still-turning propellers. The giant bronze propellers churned the boats and everyone near them to pieces, and Violet was dragged down, sucked underneath the hull of the sinking ship. Her head struck the ship's keel as she passed beneath it. Somehow she was spat back to the surface, alive, and pulled into a lifeboat. Years later, when she finally saw a doctor about the headaches, they told her something astonishing. At some point, she had fractured her skull and simply carried on. She always credited her thick hair with cushioning the blow that should have killed her. The Britannic sank in 55 minutes, but because it went down in daylight in calm seas, only 30 people died. Violet Jessop was not one of them. 3 ships, 3 disasters, a collision, an iceberg, and a mine, and 1 stewardess who walked away from all of them. The press called her Miss Unsinkable, but here is the strangest part. The sea never frightened Violet Jessop away. She kept working aboard ocean liners for decades after the war, crossing the Atlantic again and again, retiring only in her 60s. She died peacefully in bed on dry land in 1971 at the age of 83. One woman survived the 3 worst days in the history of the White Star Line. The odds against it are almost beyond belief, and yet she lived every one of them and chose the sea anyway. Would you have boarded that 3rd ship? Tell us below, and subscribe to We Find the Past for more true stories history almost forgot.